Hello, good evening, and welcome everyone to the TNT Show, The Nation Talks. And I am your John Drummond. I'm your host for the next 60 exciting minutes. And like every single show, we guarantee you 60 exciting minutes. And it's free, and it comes straight to your home. No interruptions, no editing, no huge expense, straight to you, delivered straight to you. And you know, it's been another great day for British democracy. You may recall that during the Brexit negotiations, Ruth Davidson and a number of her colleagues said that they would resign to the suite immediately should Northern Ireland have a different or better deal than Scotland did at the end of the negotiations. Well, you know, I and my guest, we've both been tied up today doing all sorts of exciting things. So if anyone has heard when they resigned, give us a call, let us know. Because we're keen to keep up with what they're doing and what they're not doing. I suspect we won't get any calls signifying that they've resigned. But who knows? Maybe somewhere they might find some ethics. That would be a good thing. Again, thanks for joining us. We have yet another great guest tonight, as I said, and I'm really excited that she's with us. The TNT Show tonight welcomes Ellen Höfer. Now, Ellen is from Germany, now lives in Lanarkshire, and she's the creative director of EU Citizens for an Independent Scotland. Now, I guarantee you that few are in a better position to talk and perhaps to cast an objective eye over the independence movement. How does it seem to Ellen? Is it working? Is it not working? If it is working, why is it working? Is it working in parts? If bits of it aren't working, maybe she has a view on some of this stuff. Maybe we can persuade her to talk about that. And we're taking your questions live. Now remember, the nation talks. So to a large extent, this is your show. You've got questions for Ellen? Let us know. We'll put those questions to her tonight. And if we've got time, we'll try and get as many answers as we possibly can over the course of the next 60 minutes. So thank you again for joining us. In many respects, as I say, this is your show. So tonight, the nation talks to Ellen Höfer. Ellen, how are you coping with the pandemic?
Hiya, John. I'm coping pretty well. I mean, we're not in war times. We have a pretty easy deal. I don't know if you guys have seen the German ad about not having to do anything and that being the main task to heroism. For those that have a fairly comfortable lifestyle and don't have to go out and struggle and are able to work from home, I think we've got it pretty easy. And on the other hand, there's a lot of people who are frontline workers who just don't have that benefit. Yeah. So I'm grateful for the time that we've had and the ease with which we've gotten through lockdown. Though of course there is mental health implications to not seeing your family and your friends. Yeah. But I'm really blessed and I know it.
Yeah. Now, as I said, you were born in Germany. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you were born, your family, where you grew up, education. Take us through that journey. Tell us about Ellen Höfer tonight, please.
Okay, we'll start with this is not the most straightforward CV, which explains how I ended up in Scotland. But my parents met at art school and had me, and they spent another 6 years together after I was born, but then divorced. Both of them went and had separate partners. And suddenly I found myself from being an only child to somebody who has 4 brothers, 2 older and 2 younger ones, and I was in the middle. Growing up wasn't always easy, especially because there was a physical distance between my parental homes and there was a lot of travel involved, and each family had their own issues. Ultimately, those issues and me moving a lot between the 2 households led to me having to leave home, being basically kicked out as a teenager. And at that point, I kind of had to decide what to do about that. I was still underage. I was still technically supposed to go to school. And it made me decide that even though English in school was by far, aside from maths, my worst subject, maybe I should go and become an au pair. So I did that and came to the UK. Being employed isn't easy, but living with your employers also isn't easy, especially when you're still busy growing up yourself.
Yeah.
So
where were you an au pair in London, perhaps? Or?
I first arrived in Surrey in a lovely little town with the charming name of Leatherhead.
Oh yes, I know it well.
It didn't last that long. I had a couple of different assignments as au pair with different people. And then after a couple of years, I decided, okay, I need to, I'm not meant, I had no desire to have my own children, nor did I think that my future was going to be in babysitting and looking after kids. So at some point you have to find like an actual job and entry into a career. And that was not easy for me because I hadn't finished school in Germany before I got kicked out. But at some point you have to decide whether to live or go to school, if you don't have that provided for free. So I moved to Ireland, to Cork, and took on my first office job. I stayed in Ireland for exactly a year to the day. And after that, I moved to Scotland. And I thought, I'll give it a shot. I actually applied for a couple of jobs and I had applied for the job that I eventually got. But I flew into Prestwick and took the train via Paisley to IBM, which is now not there anymore, in Greenock. But I started my job there and basically just started up at the reception and said, look, I applied here a couple of months ago. I don't see how I'm not qualified for the customer service positions that you're given. Would it be possible to speak to somebody from HR? And they did. Let me speak to somebody from HR. So I came to Scotland and somehow stayed over years and years. It's been an unexpected sort of arrival. I wasn't necessarily completely in love with Scotland before I arrived, but I certainly have fallen in love with this since.
Isn't that? I'll tell you what, that's a very interesting story. Just remind me again, where were you born in Germany? Which is north or south or east or west? Were we?
Right, so in Western Germany, and actually in what used to be the capital, in Bonn.
And Bonn.
It's been an interesting journey because I really like Bonn, but I never actually lived there. I've lived in Frankfurt and in Cologne mainly, and then in the countryside around Cologne. But Bonn is obviously a special place and has been quite hard hit by the moving out of government and going to Berlin. It was always meant to be a temporary central node point as a capital. But I think it was quite well placed given how central it is to the overall geographic area of Germany. So, interesting town and historic challenges.
Yeah. Our paths sort of crossed, except decades apart. I also worked at Spangle Valley with IBM. I was a product manager. I was moving technology from Minnesota to Greenock, which was interesting. I never realized that temperatures could get below -50. That was a bit of a shock. Anyway, hey, we've had some questions coming in. This is very early for questions, I have to add. We've only just started the show. Normally questions come in after about 15 minutes or so. We haven't even got to the 10-minute point and we've had some questions. So let's go. Let's just look at the question. We can come back to talking about your background in a second and how you got involved in the EU Citizens for Independent Scotland. Jim McIntyre is asking, I, like many, would advocate an EFTA-type arrangement incorporating the 4 freedoms for an independent Scotland as an initial position. Why are EU for Indy making full membership a condition for supporting independence?
I have never heard of us taking that position because we simply don't. I think it's up to the people of Scotland, and that's not just Scots, but also New Scots, everybody who's now entitled to vote, and that this time around is going to be a great deal more people than we had before. I see that a very similar question has been posted as well that has to do with EFTA and what the preferential route would be. I think all of these routes need to be laid out and it needs to be understood by the electorate of Scotland, what that means. But when I see the second question, it also hints at the position that is being taken by the SNP. And when I look at the position being taken by the SNP as opposed to the policies they are pursuing, I don't see it matching up to EU membership. So on the one hand, saying EU membership is really important to us and we want to do this thing. And on the other hand, there's several policies that just don't point in that direction. So you can see from a strategic point of view why.
What are the policies that don't point
at least?
What are the policies that don't point?
At least the fishing rights. It's the fishing rights is one of those things, but there's quite a lot of variations that currently are not being pursued by the SNP. But I also think it's worth noting that we all know SNP is first and foremost the vehicle to independence, and every party that will stand for government afterwards will have to present its plan for the future of Scotland and how they want to go about this.
Sure.
EU Citizens for an Independent Scotland does not advocate one route or the other. All that we can say is that we are EU citizens and we greatly feel for those that have lost their EU citizenship over the last couple of months, and will really feel the non-advantages of that in January. So I think there's advantages to EU membership. I don't see the point in complaining about a union now that we're in, where we don't really have a right to influence policy, or we have a technical right but not a practical right to influence policy. EFTA is a similar sort of arrangement, just that we're supposed to sit at the table but we have no ability to form policy. But I can also see the benefit of not being tied into all of the mechanics that are currently being pursued by the EU.
Yeah. And by that, do you mean the euro in particular?
I think the euro is kind of a pointless thing to talk about. Scotland can't join the EU as long as it doesn't have an independent currency away from the pound sterling. It is not possible to take the euro without having previous fiscal control over your own matters. So that is way, way down the path. I also don't really understand the fear of the euro, but it's not an immediate issue for Scotland. For Scotland, the immediate issue is to make people understand that the only sensible thing we can do is get our independent currency. Yeah,
I think the fear, if that's the right word, of the euro stems from forsaking the huge advantages that an independent currency provides. Because effectively, if you join the euro, you've given up control of your currency. It's a collective decision. It might not suit individual countries, particularly at particular times. I think that's where the fear stems from. But that's we can come back to that if you like. Tell us a little bit about, did you form EU Citizens for Independent Scotland, or was it already there? How did that happen for you?
Okay, so I'm not the founder. I joined the organisation shortly after the 2016 Brexit referendum. As an EU citizen, I was obviously not able to participate in voting on that, and I could see the result coming from miles away. And months before, I needed to make a decision: am I going to fight Brexit, or am I going, against Brexit, or am I going to fight for independence? And it seemed obvious that the only thing that is sensible to do at this point is to fight for independence rather than against something that, I don't feel all that passionate about. I think independence is the right way to go. I'd already voted for independence in 2014, and I'd been a pro-Indy supporter for a while before that. I had been politically active in Germany as well as a teenager already. But
who did you support in Germany?
Sorry.
Who did you support in Germany? Which party were you active for in Germany?
Sorry.
Oh, have we lost you? Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, I should be back connected now.
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Can you repeat that question?
Yes, of course. I'd be happy to do so. I was just interested in which political party you were active in Germany.
Right. So I was part of the youth wing of the Social Democrats, which would be a sort of equivalent of Labour. But they had a very similar trajectory as it was happening in the UK. We had a similar sort of new Labour drive in Germany, and the youth wing was a real lesson in human interaction and what that would mean. How people get corrupted by politics and by being even just remotely connected to politics. And for a 14, 15-year-old, that's a really good lesson to have, but it's not a political trajectory I wanted to carry forward in any way.
Yeah. But don't you think, though, that Lord Avon was probably correct all these years ago when he said that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely?
Yes, I think there's a danger of that happening, not just in politics, but in general. And it's really important to have safeguards. I think it's important to have people surrounding you, no matter what role you take in politics or in power, that are not afraid to speak truth to power. And I also think it's important that we never shy away from that, no matter how personally beneficial it might be to not speak the truth.
Yeah. I'd like your views on something which I ask most people who are guests, and I don't want to bore you on this, but since it's something that crops up all the time, and you might be in a better position to provide an answer to this than others we've spoken to. There is no right-wing independence movement in Scotland. If I look at other countries that have secessionist movements, there's invariably a group on the right. There may well be groups on the left and maybe some in the centre, but there's invariably a group on the right somewhere. That doesn't happen in Scotland. Why do you think that is?
First of all, I think Scotland has a pretty broad church when it comes to the independence movement. There's people with fairly right-wing views and policy ideals already represented within the movement, but under the guise of a fairly left-wing independence movement. I also think that given the general trajectory of UK politics, which are clearly increasingly right-wing and have been for a long time, we're a counter movement, and the counter movement can't afford to fight on the same plane. So this radical centrism approach that we're currently pursuing is basically a pretty far right approach to independence as well. One that gives access to lobbying and corporate interest much more than I believe the grassroots would feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Okay. Any particular examples you were thinking of?
I mean, land reform is one of the classic examples. We don't really have to talk much about it. We all know that Scotland is one of the most unequal nations when in the Western world when it comes to land ownership, and the fact that we're not addressing it, and that those that are advising on these matters are not only advising on land reform, but also on other financial and so on structures in Scotland, is really worrying. At least for me, I'm quite happy to be considered part of the left, and I have been really concerned that as a movement we are trying to stop discussion with each other, because these discussions turn into arguments and into fairly vitriolic kind of exchanges. But the ambition shouldn't be to have simplistic messages like the right wing. The simplistic messages of the right wing cannot be counteracted by a left that tries to aim for as simplistic a message. That's not how the world works, and we know it doesn't work for the right either. It's a temporary chaos causing sort of mechanism, but it cannot be our trajectory. If anything, we should be taking the time to have these discussions properly and to remove the non-target oriented discussions. Let's remove the insult. Let's remove the accusations. Let's focus on policy and quest on policy, because that's the only way we can move forward.
Don't you think that's rather, if you don't mind me saying so, idealistic? Because if you look at any political grouping of any kind, we talked about power corrupting, for example, one of the features of any activist group is it is factional to some degree. People do take strong positions and therefore tend to be upset when other people don't agree with them. And sometimes it becomes personal. It's just the nature of radical, if I can call it that, politics. It's the nature of it. If you're in a position of power, you can afford to be somewhat relaxed and rather blasé, because you've got what you want, if you're trying to change something, you have to be forceful. And sometimes people, when they're forceful, make a faux pas or two and upset other people. It's natural, isn't it?
I think if we look at the reality of Scottish politics, the people that are currently in power are a hell of a lot more paranoid and quite aggressive about preserving that power than people trying to change the trajectory of those in power.
Yeah.
So I think it's not as clear cut as you just outlined there. And it is true, it is a fairly idealistic view. The problem is that if we don't strive for idealism, what are we striving for?
Yeah. Well, it's the nature of every movement in favour of change. There's always generally, history tells us, generally two camps. There's the folks who want change right away and they want it to be very far-reaching. And then there's the other group, you might call them pragmatists, who say, well, let's do it a little piece at a time and not upset too many people, because if we upset too many people, we'll never persuade sufficient to support us when it comes to a major vote like a referendum. So there's the two camps. There's gently, and there's the folks who say, no, you must be clear about what you want to achieve, because that's the way you will attract support. Gently will not attract support. That's, by and large, that's the way these things tend to operate, don't you think?
I think both fractions have factual parts in their argument, and those are the parts that we need to listen to. Gently, slowly has the potential to appeal, right? But without a certain radicalism that comes from people trying to seek the change that this political change is supposed to bring about. You are likely to lose the support from your voter base, and not just the voter base, more importantly, from the
Yeah, we've got some interference on the sound. Could you repeat that, please?
Sorry. So when people say that, we need to only go gently, I don't think it's a constructive way forward. But neither is just shouting for the most radical change possible. The reality is that if you alienate your voter base and your activists, you're likely to lose crucial support that will not be the ones that turn out when you need them. People will not fight for a middle of the road sort of policy. The reason that 2014 was so transformative was because it tackled the difficult issues, specifically when it comes to class and inequality in Scotland, and it activated that sort of voter that hadn't really believed in change for such a long time and now could see the hope and the silver lining on the horizon. So it's a kind of midway, but we can't just dismiss one side or the other. It's not right to do. Go by the policy and go by the factual, by the fact that you can see for both sides. It's othering people is not healthy, no matter whether it's inside the movement or outside the movement.
Yeah. When you say the movement, you're talking about the Yes movement.
Yes.
Yeah. Are you a member of the SNP?
No, I'm not a member of any party.
Okay, neither have I. So I'd like to ask you this question. When you look at the SNP, and you can answer this for the Yes movement as well as the SNP, but let's start with the SNP. When you look at the SNP, what's your evaluation of its effectiveness, bearing in mind it's been in power for 12 years?
It's a complex question. I think when I first entered Scottish politics, I was a hell of a lot more optimistic about what the SNP was trying to achieve, and we were riding on the coattails of what was an incredibly successful referendum, though not a winning referendum. But the movement didn't suddenly crawl underground and decide, okay, well, that was that. And the movement stayed active and tried to develop itself and continue to develop itself, and has been really proactive about that. And that is extremely heartening to see. I can't say the same for the SNP in the last couple of years. I think there's been a fair degree of calcification. And I'm not a big believer in polling as it stands. Polling is useful, but those people that are in the independence movement are politically active and more likely to be on the pulse of time, while the general public is kind of behind the curve and influenced by more populist means of being steered towards an opinion or another. So I can't say that I have been particularly impressed, though I was hoping I would be, and had been open to joining the SNP at some point when I started doing work for the independence movement.
Yeah.
Not taken place, and I think the calcification, the lack of internal democratic structure within the SNP. So I'm fairly heartened by how the NEC election went in terms of people proclaiming to seek a reformation of the lack of the democratic structures.
Yeah.
Excuse me. That kind of stuff is long overdue, and I think people were really unhappy after this conference, both within the movement for the lack of constructive discussion, as well as within the party for the overhaul that is taking place, and that felt a bit like having the rug pulled from underneath everybody's feet.
Yeah.
I'm quite glad that at least there's movement again, because there has been this kind of paralyzed calcification going on with a lot of career politicians either staying in jobs, being shifted around in jobs, and trying to just cling on to a very narrow centrist kind of bridge of policy. I'm glad that there's some movement again, because now there's time for progress and the power behind the progress.
Okay. Lisa Duffy is asking, do you think Nicola Sturgeon is doing a good job in keeping the support with her? Because she is more of a gently practitioner.
I think Nicola Sturgeon, we all are aware that Nicola Sturgeon is an incredibly charismatic and capable handler of media, and has been a capable administrator for the independence movement and for the SNP and for the Scottish government. Nicola Sturgeon is set to become the longest serving First Minister if she gets re-elected as the First Minister this time round.
Yeah.
That is a good time to start asking yourself the question about how politicians end their careers, and whether the timing to end your career has come while people are still clapping, or whether you would prefer to do so while people stop clapping. And I think that must be a very difficult personal challenge. There's obviously a lot of things that are happening around Nicola Sturgeon and issues that she is involved with and responsible for that might yet come back to haunt her. And I do worry that if there is no direct drive for independence, given we all know now that, for example, the Scottish government has discontinued work on the white paper for independence in March due to COVID as far as they're concerned, but as far as the rest of the movement is concerned, that seems to be a strategically questionable decision, given that if we don't drive for independence, every little thing is going to knock us off our feet. We have no full control in order to steer against the influences that will just impact Scotland, because life is life and life moves on regardless of COVID, regardless of Brexit. And if we put independence in second place behind everything every time, we're kind of putting ourselves in the position of being behind the curve and being subject to outside changes. I believe Nicola Sturgeon would have been an excellent First Minister after independence, and I think that was sort of the plan, but it didn't work out like that in 2014. And at the minute, what we're needing is a proactive, aggressive fighter for independence that puts that first and foremost. That's what she was elected to do as well, but I don't think it's her personal forte. She would be an excellent administrator and a great representation for Scotland in the world, but she is actually not pushing independence for Scotland at this point, and we all can't be in any illusions about that.
Okay, but we might come back to that. What's your evaluation of the Yes movement, leaving aside the SNP, if that were possible?
I think the Yes movement is actually really impressive. There's a lot of countries and movements around the world that would love to have our diversity, our approaches, our passion, our knowledge, not least of all knowledge. There's parts of knowledge in the Scottish population and also the Yes movement that are kind of lacking. Like the rest of the UK, Scotland is not really tuned in what is happening in other countries, not even European countries that much, unless it directly relates to our own political struggles. And that's a real issue. We don't really understand what's going on around the world and how our lives tie in with that if it doesn't relate to something that we feel we can relate to in them. And that's a problem. I think we have a bit of a democratic knowledge deficit. Scotland's quite happy to rebel, but is still looking for leaders. And the Yes movement, luckily, hasn't really fallen for that trap. People here now seem to be driving very much for a more comprehensive approach that does away with leaders as specific individual, quite isolated points of attack that can be taken down, but instead making a strong movement that together can push in similar directions from different angles. And for somebody who adds to the diversity of the independence movement, I'm really proud of how much diversity of opinion there is. We can do way, way better when it comes to diversity of background. Very rarely do we see young women, young people from different migrant backgrounds. We see way too few disabled people part of the discussion. But that's something that we're about to tackle, I believe. And it's high time that we do.
Oh, that's interesting. That's a very good point. I mean, I've spent a bit of time outside the country, and I was struck, as you have been, by the fact that there's a paucity of, I would say, not so much understanding, but a paucity of information about other countries. And that's a function, to some degree, of obviously our educational system. And I'm using a very broad brush approach here. I mean, there's 8 whole areas, and there are people, we've interviewed them, they've been guests, who have a very, very widespread knowledge of other countries and a deep and profound understanding. But talking in general terms, and my sense of it always was that one of the guilty parties in this lack of awareness, understanding, is the media. In other words, when I look at the UK media, only the American media approaches it in terms of insularity, it often seems to me. And Peter has asked that very question. He says, what's Ellen's thought on the media? What's your evaluation? You know how the media works in other countries. What do you think of the Scottish media?
First of all, I don't think there's all that much of a Scottish media because we just don't have that many outlets. We also don't seem to be taking a greater interest in it. And I actually think right across the independence movement, we're underestimating how little focus there is on strengthening the Scottish media landscape. Independence Life has been doing a sterling job on a shoestring budget. So has, Broadcasting Scotland. The National is, it's supposed to be a pro-independence newspaper, but it has in recent times become a very, very criticized sort of mouthpiece for the SNP side of things, which does not necessarily represent the opinions of the independence movement. And so they're running into trouble there. It's also connected into other ownership issues. I think even if we look at representatives of the movement, Alex Salmond going to RT and making a decent amount of cash with that's money that would have been well invested in Scottish media outlets that could have provided him with a similar show, not least Broadcasting Scotland and Independence Live. And I can understand the drive for money and for some peacocking in front of the camera, but I can't understand the lack of prioritizing strengthening the mechanisms we have in Scotland. I think people are not really aware what other news they have access to now as well. I mean, Germany and France have a joint channel called RTE, ARTE, and they do English programs as well. They do it in loads of different languages, and then their programs are of really high quality. They cover a lot of different things, not just culture and politics and travel. It's a very reflective program. Do any in the independence movement really regularly go and get their news from there? I highly, highly doubt it. There's a lot on offer, but we are so busy shouting about how evil the BBC is and how bad our mainstream media coverage is, that we're not really paying attention to what can be done. And again, this is where my, as you said, idealism kicks in. And I'm like, stop talking about what's not working and start putting energy into what you can make work.
Hey, here's a thought. Why don't you start up your own channel like this, like the TNT Show, and introduce people to what's happening elsewhere. Would you be up for that?
I thought about it a couple of times. When I was a little girl, I always wanted to be on the radio, with a face for radio and stuff. Moving to the UK has kind of robbed me of my confidence when it comes to that, not least because of it being my second language. And the reality of being somebody who's more or less self-employed also is that I'm wearing a lot of hats at the same time. So yeah, I've participated in Broadcasting Scotland. I've been on here a couple of times. I'm writing for Stores.Scot. I'm part of volunteering for Commonweal. I take part in EU Citizens for an Independent Scotland. I founded New Scots for Yes. There's only so much time in the day, and I'm hoping that people will take it as an invitation to come in. It's high time, and especially when it comes to the groups that are not white and not native Scots, or are not male and not middle-aged.
Yeah,
this is the time for you to lean in. It's such a rare occasion to see younger or female people from a diverse or different background even represented within the independence movement.
Yeah.
Please come and give me a break. Make your opinions heard. You have a responsibility, and you can't just spend it moaning at how nothing is changing. Yeah. This is exhausting, and it is frustrating. And everybody in the independence movement will have experienced that to some degree, but it's worthwhile doing. We can't do it by ourselves. And if you want the best for Scotland, please be part of doing better.
Yeah. We've checked this out on IndyLive, and there's a question of the best media to reach people, let's say under 40. This is perhaps not the most effective way to do that. Our initial research, and it's pretty fumbling stuff, suggests that lots of people in that age range consume their media very, very differently to this. In other words, we think there's a lot to commend itself in 60 minutes talking to somebody who has a particular viewpoint, who can articulate that viewpoint clearly, and therefore there's a learning experience, hopefully entertaining as well, but certainly learning. But we're aware from the feedback we've gotten that once you go down to less venerable ages, if I could put it that way, there's less of an impact. You have to change your approach. Would you agree with that, or do you feel this sort of media reaches right across the board?
Well, I think they got here before we did. They've been using the internet in a more efficient and more communicative way than we have for a while. Yeah. I think what is lacking is our approach to topics that interest them. I remember going to SIC for a solid year representing my organization, and looking around and realizing I'm probably one of the youngest people in the room, and there's only 2 or 3 of us. Young people will not bother traveling to Edinburgh and Glasgow even after lockdown to sit in a room with shouting people for 2 hours and then go back to their lack of organization. That's not how we communicate, and especially not if we don't consider what topics are interesting and relevant to young people. I can tell you one thing: if there's one topic that we need to engage with young people with, it's global warming. They are interested. They do give a They do, because it's the world that they are about to inherit, and we're all terribly depressed about it.
Yeah. Well, let me
that's
just
the topic. How you reel them in, and anything that's to do with. Sorry.
Let me turn that round, if I may. I think IndyLive would be interested in platforming a young person who was willing to come on and talk about global warming. So, do you know of anyone who might be interested in doing what we're doing now, but the specific focus would be global warming?
I'm not sure I know anybody, but I know plenty of people in different organizations already pre-existent in the independence movement that should be approached for this kind of stuff.
Good.
Putting out a call and saying, look, we're looking to do a program that has to do with global warming, with a climate emergency, with, responding to it and analyzing policy from a younger perspective. Please get in touch. Yeah. That would be probably a good way to start.
Yeah, good. I think that's good advice, and I'm sure Kevin and others will be listening in tonight. And if there's anything I can do to progress that, then I'm happy to be involved. Here's a question from John. He's asking, can Helen please give us an idea of which European countries have most people resident in Scotland and roughly how many from the largest? Yes.
So overall, there's about 230,000 EU citizens in Scotland just now. A good half of them are Polish. So I don't know if you guys have seen from your organizations across the country. The iMail sent out a couple of boxes with different flyers and materials and flags. In one of those boxes, we had 2 sets of flyers, one in English and one in Polish, to address voter registration 2 years ago because it was necessary, because nobody was talking about voter registration. It is now even more pertinent to do that because we have just added a load more people and re-added EU citizens to the franchise. Okay. There's going to be people who have never voted in this country, and if we don't focus on voter registration this time around, we're really daft. All the positive rhetoric from the Scottish government when it comes to migration will be for nothing if we don't activate those voters and reassure them that we want to hear from them, that we want them to participate. That is what you need to do as a movement just now, and I can't put it any more clearly. After the polls, there's a couple of other groups, but they are by far the most significant group within Scotland. The electoral franchise update that we've received in November, December last year also adds people that previously haven't voted in Scotland. That's, American citizens, Australian citizens, those, anybody that you can think of. We've even added refugees, so that's a relatively small proportion of the people that we've added. But there's a load of people who now have a say. Basically, the only people not allowed to vote in Scotland just now is prisoners with a term time over 12 months and asylum seekers, and everybody else should be entitled to vote in Scottish elections. Please make sure that no matter whose door you knock at, you ask them to vote.
Well, there you are, folks. That's excellent advice. So if you have a Polish neighbour next door, or if you've got Polish associates at work, I know we've got COVID right now, but if you're in Zoom meetings and you're with folks from Poland who've come here, like my daughter-in-law, for example, and then have a chat and see if they're registered to vote. Because if they're not registered to vote, then as Eleanor says, that's a vote just gone, just for the sake of not being organised. And that's really pretty awful, frankly. I mean, at the end of the day, it's really all about getting the vote. And we're talking here, did you say 200,000, roughly 200,000 Polish people?
Over 200,000 EU citizens, yeah.
Well, that's huge. Huge. I mean, that's like
it's significant. It's also significant to realise that we don't really know much about the new Scots that are living in this country, especially based on their political views. This is one of the reasons why I started founding New Scots for Yes. One of our main intentions is to raise awareness of the fact that when we do political polling, it is split between Scottish, English and other is lumped into a category with very few respondents as opposed to the other two groups. That doesn't tell us very much, and it doesn't allow us to specifically campaign and target our message to the people that we're talking to. Of course, you have to understand the individual that is in front of you when you're talking to them, but there are very much topics that just apply by your background, by your cultural background, and how you view independence and what your objections might be. I also think there's a lot of stereotyping about what will be important. I mean, immigration is not the only thing that's important to migrants. We're really involved in working rights, and we're looking at pensions as much as anybody else. We don't know enough yet, and there is not enough being done about it. I've been shouting about it for over 4 years now, and there's been very little movement and change and action behind this. It's very nice to say, oh, we're open and welcoming, and don't desert us, and you're welcome to vote as well. But if we don't understand the electorate that we have just added to our electoral franchise, you're still disenfranchising them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Who do you think ought to be responsible for building on this? I mean, is it the Yes movement or New Scots for Independence, or who ought to be responsible for taking this forward? Should the Scottish government be doing more?
Absolutely. I mean, but I would say that I was really optimistic when I joined USIS.
If you had the government minister, forget it's me talking, and I am the government minister responsible, what advice would you give me right now?
The advice that I've already given him in person, which is that there is a very clear case to be made, is at least for when we're talking about EU citizens, we are facing a real cliff edge with no physical proof of status when it comes to settled status, which is a whole, excuse my French, but bullshit area of policy from the UK. I get all of that, but we still don't have a physical proof. Instead of us having it, people are meant to look us up online, and we need a physical proof. So that would need to be addressed. But in terms of Scotland overall, my major bugbear is that there is no real overview of discrimination. And that isn't just about nationality. That's about religion. That's about disability. That's about gender. It's about all sorts of things. We don't really understand the kind of discrimination that goes on in Scotland. And because of that, we can say, well, there's not much going on about it. But we actually have to understand what the discrimination issues are in order to address them and to assess them. And if we don't do that, there is a clear path available for the Scottish government. They're already working with the Citizens Advice Bureau to offer a citizens advice and settled status hotline for EU citizens to get information. But the same mechanism would work in collaboration with the Citizens Advice Bureau to have a discrimination reporting hotline and a campaign Scotland-wide that says that if you experience anything, whether you think the police should know about it or not, if you feel discriminated, please report it so we can start to understand how this works.
Yeah.
And this way you start to understand where the issues lie for different groups in Scotland. It's just a no-brainer with the path that's already there, and it's not being pursued despite having been on the table for over a year and a half now.
Yeah. So what response did you get from the Scottish government when you tabled this?
I'm trying to moderate my words. The immigration minister is a very nice man and very capable of interacting in a socially friendly way, but there hasn't been a concrete response. There hasn't been good reasons as to why we shouldn't be doing more other than saying, foreigners in Scotland are welcome and valued. There needs to be more policy to that rhetoric stick, and there's not much happening. And I believe that is, even though the Scottish government is responsible for doing this, for doing the best that they can within the constitutional arrangement that exists, and all the suggestions that I've made evolve around that framework, we have to put pressure onto the Scottish government to do more than just say nice words.
Well, let's start right now then. Let's. What is the minister's name?
Ben McPherson.
Ben McPherson. Ben, if you're watching this tonight, or if anyone watching this tonight knows Ben, and Ben would like to come on the show as a guest and explain to Ellen and others why there hasn't been any movement on this, or if there has been movement, why it's not been discernible. You're very welcome. We'll save a seat for you, and you can come and tell us and give us all the details. Open invitation, Ben. Do come along. Do share with us what you're doing. Is there any other government ministers you would like to have an answer from that you've asked questions? You've put questions to and they haven't responded. Oh, we lost your sound again.
That would be responsible. Hi, one of the people that would be responsible is the Minister for Europe. I believe he retires in about 6 months, but that's Mike Russell. So he could give some information. A couple of years ago, he was one of the people who at the SNP conference stood up and said that, this was around the time when it became clear that the Home Office would be deporting EU citizens who don't apply for settled status. He said that, that they won't be doing that from Scotland. I'm sure we remember it being splashed all over the headlines. I went back to Mike Russell and asked him specifically about what he meant, and it turned out that when he had the opportunity to explain himself, how he explained himself was that he said, that he would be more than happy to defend anybody who has gained legal immigration status under UK law. So that's not really helping anybody, and I don't believe it's within the actual content of the message that he sent at the time and that made so many positive headlines. So how are we going to protect people in that remit? Anybody who feels responsible and has at any point said anything positive about immigration or anything negative about the way that the UK handles immigration, including the way that we treat refugees and asylum seekers, those people are now required to do more than just say words, request concrete action, make concrete plans. The time for talking is over.
Okay, well, the invitation that we just extended to Ben is also extended to Mike. Mike, it's been years since we last spoke, but it'd be lovely to have you back on the show, giving some answers, please, if you have them, to Ellen's point, and anything else you would like to talk about, because Ellen's suggesting you're getting close to stepping down, and I gather that's the case. This is an ideal time, some might suggest, to come on and share with us your views on this and a whole raft of other stuff I'm sure you'd be happy to talk about. We'll wipe the diary free and allow you to come on. All you've got to do is get in touch. By the way, if you want to do that, and I hope you will, then my email is john@cleash.com. C for Charlie, L for Leo, A for Echo, I for India, S for Sugar, H for Harry.com. Drop me a line. We'd love to have you on board and having the same discussion that we're having with Ellen tonight, because I've learned a lot from what she's been saying, and I'm sure people would learn a lot from what you have to say. And Ben, same invitation to you. Please come on. Please tell us what you think, what you've been doing. So many people would like to know. Well, Helen, we've got about 10 minutes, so this show goes fast. You just sit down and you ask a few questions and you answer a few, and bingo, we're almost through. Now, somebody has written to say, look, the Scottish Government are not empowered to change immigration. That wasn't what you were suggesting, was it?
It wasn't at all. We are all well aware that immigration isn't devolved, but it is not least within the remit of the Scottish Government to pursue any and all ideas that allow us to exploit and push the boundaries of devolution. And we should do so if we really believe that there's human rights violations taking place, which we all should be aware that there are. And also the things that I'm suggesting, I've written a whole paper about it 18 months ago. None of them require for immigration to be devolved. This is about doing what we can. And we quite often, as Scottish independence supporters, rest on this rather comfortable pillow of, oh, it's not our responsibility and there's nothing we can do, which often stops us from even exploring what could be done. We really need to grow up about this.
Yeah. If people want to get a copy of your paper, where can they get it? Is it online somewhere?
Aye, it's online. If you want to find me on Twitter, just find me on Twitter. It's at Ellen Joëlle, Joelle, ELLEN JOELLE, and I'll post it there tonight. I think there's more stuff that I'm interested in. After 4 years of campaigning for EU citizens and migrant rights within the movement, trust me,
Something wrong with your mic, Ellen? We lost you there. There you are. No, we lost you.
Cool.
That's better. You're back now.
Yeah, I didn't jump.
No, we lost you again. No, I lost whose audio? We lost your audio, Ellen.
I should be back now.
Ah.
Sorry, I don't know what's going on with the audio.
Okay. So again, please.
Yeah, there's other stuff that we should be getting on with when we're looking towards gaining independence, and immigration is not the only thing that we should be focusing on, though we need to remember that if we're looking for recognition from the international community, there's no better way of building solidarity than protecting those nations, peoples on our own soil. And if that means stretching what devolution means and making life difficult for the Home Office, please bloody do. There's other things that we need to look forward to. The economy is one of them. And, with the announcement that we can't really do anything about independence until the economic impact of Brexit is known, until the economic impact of COVID is known, All of these are excuses. Also, meanwhile, we have 9 years left, according to the IPCC, to do something constructive and comprehensive about global warming and our response to it, which means that we have the ball in our court that is unavoidable, which means a Green New Deal. And a Green New Deal would provide an economic case that is undeniable on every level possible. Yeah. Every country in the world will need to borrow money to power their Green New Deals. Scotland has a huge percentage of resources for Europe when it comes to green energy production. The jobs that will be created by a Green New Deal will require more workers than Scotland itself can supply, and that brings its own challenges and opportunities. There is simply no better case to be made. And so my takeaway from the SNP conference is that there was not even one mention of a Green New Deal. That is something where I would start really, really shouting and saying, why is all of this being framed in the context of inward investment, which is a synonym for profit extraction to abroad shareholders and investors? That is not how we should be doing this.
Good point. Good point. Mary Malloy has just said, I enjoy your very truthful answers. Very refreshing, Ellen.
Thanks. It's not always easy. What we started to talk about at the beginning, it's sometimes difficult to speak truth to power. Yeah. I'm not immune to the criticism that I get for being a critical eye. And yeah, it's good to hear that. Thank you very much, Mary.
I'll have to ask the inevitable question. Have you ever thought of standing for office?
I have often been asked, and personally, I really do not wish to. I don't think it's the way to go. I'm not a big fan of politics in the first place, and I think it's not the way to really go forward, especially if you have ideas that are applicable to not just, specific party interests, but to a whole nation. You should make yourself available to anybody willing to collaborate on them. No matter what other opinions you don't share with them. For me, green issues and sustainability are at the very, very top of my list at the minute, because any other issues cease to be relevant at the point where we miss our deadline.
Well, that's why I asked the question. I mean, the logical thing would be to call Patrick Harvey and say you'd like to be a Green candidate.
I used to be a member of the Green Party and left it. I find they have mentioned a Green New Deal very recently in their conference, in their approach to their last conference, which was a month before the SNP conference, and the detail on their G&D plan is lacking, and it's full of holes. There doesn't seem to be any real drive for it, and it seems to be a sort of paying lip service. No, thank you. I think we can do better. We need to build pressure in a whole different way, and really politics and personalities. I'm not the right personality for this. I'm an introverted person who can, crank up the energy for little talks like this. But I am really uncomfortable in the limelight, and I don't want the attention on me. I want it on policy, and that's what I'm going to keep shouting about for the rest of my political career.
I think you do yourself a disservice, if you don't mind me saying so. Well, by the way, we just mentioned Patrick Harvey. Patrick, if you'd like to come on the show and talk about the Green New Deal and the way it's being organised in the Green Party, as Ellen touched upon, feel free. Give us a call, john@cleash.com. You're very welcome to come on. Well, our time's almost up, Ellen. Thank you very much. That was very enlightening and very interesting. I could only echo what Mary said, that it's been a really interesting conversation. And I hope you've enjoyed the discussion. The nation was talking to Ellen Höfer. As I said, I thought it was interesting. I thought it was engaging. I thought it was refreshing. I thought it was forceful. These are all the qualities that we look for in guests on the TNT show. So a big thank you to Ellen. As ever, we have a formidable list of guests coming up. We have, next week, listen to this, don't clutch your pearls too soon. We have Ken MacDonald next week as our guest. Ken is an ex-BBC Scotland commentator. Kevin knows a lot about how the BBC works, particularly in Scotland. And hopefully he'll be able to share at least some of that with us. So get your questions in now for Ken, who's appearing next week. Look out for the Constitution column in the Sunday National. It's a 7-day supplement. You'll find it in that section. And Elliot Bulmer will be discussing the newly refreshed interest in federalism. And I'm sure he has a particular view on that. Oh, and very importantly, please support IndyLive. Go to the What's On Guide, www.whatsonguide.scot, and you'll find about this cornucopia of offerings on IndyLive. You wouldn't believe how rich it is. And thanks again, and a good night. Join us next Wednesday. And remember, it's been a great day for British democracy. Good night, all.
Never miss a live stream. The What's On Guide to live stream events and shows now has its own website. You can find the guide at whatsonguide.scot, independencelive.net, or on multiple Facebook pages. Do you create your own live stream events and shows? Get them registered on the guide. See whatsonguide.scot for full details.
This is a new voice for a new Scotland.
We know you're busy people, so most of our shows are also on demand on our Scottish Independence podcast channel, available wherever you get your podcasts. You'll see what a great variety of shows we have. There's something for everyone. Our newest on-demand platform is IndyLive Radio's YouTube channel. We have set up playlists for our most popular shows and current topics, currency, list parties. New content is added almost daily, so subscribe and you won't miss anything. Join us. Thanks for listening.
IndyLive Radio.
Film. You can watch this again. You can be part of it. It's Independence Live. Yeah. A few people asked about YouTube. It'll be YouTube/Independence Live. That's where you'll find the footage.
It's not acceptable to say we just keep on trying and we have another mandate and we have another mandate and we keep on trying. You've got to make a political judgment that it's not going to work and say, well, in that case, we have either got to admit that we're not going to go for independence. And this is where I think the government has not been honest with people. That is, I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying that it is at least a possibility. If we hone in totally on Section 30, we could not get a referendum at all under Section 30. And therefore, that to me means that you've got to find another way.
But I don't think anybody who's gone over to yes now is really for moving, because I think they can see clear as day what things look like. And I always felt that during the independence referendum, that it would take a no vote in order for a lot of Scots to realise the consequences of voting no. They would have to see what happens when they vote no in order to realise what a mistake it was.
And to me, that's the clear blue water between staying in the UK and going for independence. It's clear, regardless of what Boris Johnson said the other day, that they will want to go back to business as usual, where the ultra-rich are the ones who gain from everything. Mm-hmm. We don't want to be part of that. We want the chance to actually build a fairer country.
It's the Brexit stuff for me, the nepotism stuff for me, breaking international law stuff for me, the ERG hijacking UK democracy stuff for me, education is a luxury stuff for me, £9,000 tuition a year stuff for me, it's the NHS on the table for a US trade deal stuff for me, demonising the working classes stuff for me, refusing starving children free school meals stuff for me, it's Boris calling Muslim women letterboxes stuff for me, his pickaninnies comments stuff for me, his bum boys comments stuff for me, his Scotland as a verminous race comments stuff for me, the UK internal market bill ripping up the devolution settlement stuff for me, devolved legislators being ignored during Brexit stuff for me, a lack of UK leadership during COVID stuff for me, nuclear weapons being in Scotland stuff for me, a decade of Tory governments Scotland didn't elect stuff for me, it's a weak left opposition in England stuff for me, attempting to frame independence as anti-English bigotry stuff for me, it's trying to ban anti-capitalist references in schools stuff for me, it's England-centric lefties painting SNP as a protest vote even though Scottish Labour is spineless stuff for me, it's the UK for me.
Hi there, I'm Cliff.
And I'm Russ.
And we're from the Veterans for Scottish Independence 2.0 group. And we're just invading your privacy today to let you know that we will be very shortly pushing a programme out on live stream to do with the veterans, their needs as it will be during an independent campaign. The next independence campaign, and indeed in an independent Scotland.
So get yourself in gear, come and join us, pull up a sandbag.
Yes.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Never miss a live stream. The What's On guide to live stream events and shows now has its own website. You can find the guide at whatsonguide.scot, independencelive.net, or on multiple Facebook pages. Do you create your own live stream events and shows? Get them registered on the guide. See whatsonguide.scot for full details.
It's the Brexit stuff for me, the nepotism stuff for me, breaking international law stuff for me, the ERG hijacking UK democracy stuff for me, education is a luxury stuff for me, £9,000 tuition a year stuff for me, it's the NHS on the table for a US trade deal stuff for me, demonising the working classes stuff for me, refusing starving children free school meals stuff for me, it's Boris calling Muslim women letterboxes stuff for me, his pickaninnies comments stuff for me, his bum boys comments stuff for me, his Scotland is a verminous race comments stuff for me, the UK internal market bill ripping up the devolution settlement stuff for me, devolved legislators being ignored during Brexit stuff for me, a lack of UK leadership during COVID stuff for me, nuclear weapons being in Scotland stuff for me, a decade of Tory governments Scotland didn't elect stuff for me, it's a weak left opposition in England stuff for me, attempting to frame independence as anti-English bigotry stuff for me, it's trying to ban anti-capitalist references in schools stuff for me, it's England-centric lefties painting SNP as a protest vote even though Scottish Labour is spineless stuff for me, it's the UK for me.
It's a song I wrote about 5 minutes ago called Carpe Diem, Hope Over Fear. Are you threatened by words from an empire of money and gold? Will you trade in your country's potential for the lies you've been sold? Are you scared that the walls are too high to be breached by the bold? Will you stand and be counted or shut up and do what you're told? Hope over fear, don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, will you seize the day? Rip the chains from the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Did the TV man call you a nationalist for rejecting the lies? Are the wolves of the few off the bob cause they wear shirts and ties? When they tell you that Scotland's no great, are you really surprised? Will you stand and be counted for something that money can't buy? Hope over fear, don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, will you seize the day? Rip the chains from the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Happy that nuclear weapons are dumped on the Clyde, fighting wars for the wealth of the few. How many have died? You can bury my bones, but the truth of it can't be denied. Will you stand and be counted, cause I'll be there stood by your side. Hope over fear, don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, will you seize the day? Rip the chains from the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Will the media tell you that England don't want you to go? And the taxpayer-funded MPs tell you just tell them no. No, but in from Manchester, Nottingham, Sheffield, they already know that we're fighting for them, and it's only the start of the show. Ha ha! Hope over fear, don't be afraid. Tell Westminster Tories that Scotland's no longer your slave. Carpe diem, my friend, will you seize the day? Ha. With the chains on the unicorn, Scotland's no longer your slave. Vote yes for a future. Hope over fear. Ha ha!